I should have known something was wrong the moment I saw that trail marker. Even now, after everything that happened, I still replay that exact moment in my mind. The way the wooden arrow seemed too new, too clean, almost like someone had hammered it into the dirt just minutes before I reached it. But when you're hiking alone, hours deep into a forest that barely shows up on satellite images, you make quick decisions based on instinct, not suspicion. And that instinct, the one I trusted my whole life, is the reason I ended up somewhere no official map has ever acknowledged. People always ask why I went out there by myself. The short answer is, I needed to get away. I needed the silence, the reset, the reminder that the world is bigger than my problems. I'd done solo hikes before, many of them harder than this one. I wasn't inexperienced. I had my compass, my GPS device, a power bank, marked water points, and route notes. I planned to follow the ridge trail up to a lookout point, camp overnight, and come down the next day before noon. Simple, clean, predictable. At least, that was the plan. I remember the morning being cold, not freezing, but crisp enough that every breath fogged the air. The forest was awake but quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's watching you. Leaves under my boots snapped like thin bones. Birds kept their distance. The sun was barely pushing its way through the canopy, and for the first hour everything went exactly how I expected. Then I reached the fork. My printed map showed only one direction, straight. My GPS showed a faint trail bending slightly to the left. But there, nailed to a tree, was a wooden arrow pointing right. Bright orange paint, freshly brushed. No signs of weathering. The arrow said, "Look out." I should have checked the coordinates before blindly trusting it. I should have noticed that the bark behind it wasn't even discolored from exposure. I should have turned around right then, but I didn't. I followed the arrow. At first, it felt normal. The trail was narrow, but not unnaturally so. A few fallen branches, a mild incline, the usual. But after 10 minutes, the ground began to slope downward instead of upward, which made no sense. Lookouts don't sit in valleys. My GPS lost signal for a moment, which happens sometimes, but when it came back, it placed me several meters off the mapped trail. I frowned, tapped the screen, adjusted my pack, and kept going. Another bad decision. The forest changed in a way I can't fully explain. It was subtle at first. The trees grew taller, their trunks straighter, almost perfectly spaced, as if someone planted them in a grid long ago. The air felt cooler, heavier. Even the soil felt different. Softer, springy, like hiking across a mattress instead of dirt. I remember thinking, this is wrong. But by then, curiosity had already tightened its grip on my mind. When the second arrow appeared, another fresh wooden sign nailed low to the trunk of a tree, I stopped completely. It didn't say "look out" this time. It just pointed forward, with no text at all. A silent direction, a silent invitation. My instinct for the first time pushed back. Hard. I stood there alone in the middle of nowhere, arguing with myself in my head. Turn back, check the ridge trail again, get to the lookout the normal way. But something pulled me forward, not a sound, not a voice. Just an overwhelming feeling that if I turned around, I'd regret it forever. It didn't make sense, but it was real. So I walked. The deeper I went, the more the world around me seemed disconnected from the forest I had started in. I couldn't hear wind anymore, even though the branches moved slightly overhead. The temperature stayed the same, even when I crossed into shaded areas. The shadows felt deliberate. That's the only word that fits. Deliberate. As if everything around me was positioned, not grown for a specific purpose. By the time I realized the trail had disappeared entirely, it was too late. I was standing on bare ground, covered not with leaves, but with a thin layer of pale, powder-like dust. When I knelt to touch it, it clung to my fingertips like ash. The trees around me were taller than ever, too tall to be natural, stretching upward into a canopy so thick I couldn't see the sky at all. My throat tightened. I checked my GPS again. No signal. The screen glitched, then reset itself. My compass spun halfway, stopped, then twitched again. as if something nearby was interfering with it. That was the moment I first felt it, being watched. Not by a person, not by an animal, something else. Something that didn't belong to any normal forest I'd ever known. I forced myself to breathe slowly, reminding myself not to panic. Panic is how people get lost deeper. Panic is how people get hurt. I stood perfectly still, listening. Nothing. No birds, no bugs, no wind, not even the rustle of leaves. A dead, absolute silence. Then I noticed the path. Not a hiking trail, not a natural opening. A corridor. The trees on either side bent slightly inward, forming a subtle arch almost like an entrance. And on the ground, that pale powder formed a clean strip leading deeper. I should have gone back. Every instinct in me screamed it. But something about the corridor felt intentional, like someone or something wanted me to follow it. And against every bit of logic I possessed, I did. After maybe 20 minutes, the corridor opened into a clearing so strange I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. At the center was a stone. No, not a stone structure exactly. More like a monolith. Smooth, rectangular, standing perfectly upright with no markings. It didn't look old. It didn't look new. It just existed, as if it had always been there. And around it, arranged in a perfect circle, were trail markers. Wooden ones. Just like the one I had followed. Fresh, clean, brightly painted. Dozens of them, all pointing inward, toward the stone. My legs locked. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. This wasn't a campsite. This wasn't a landmark. This was deliberate fabrication in a place where no hikers ever go, where no official trails exist. I took a step back. The forest reacted. Not with sound, but with movement. Something shifted behind me. Not footsteps, not leaves. The air itself seemed to move, like the atmosphere was alive and circling me. I turned slowly, terrified of what I might see, but there was nothing visible. Just the same impossibly tall trees and that dead silence. Then the monolith vibrated, not visibly. I didn't see it move. I felt it, through the ground, up my legs, into my spine. A low hum that seemed to press inside my skull. I stumbled backward, tripped over a root and scrambled to my feet. I grabbed my backpack, turned and ran. I didn't look back to see if anything followed. I just ran, pushing through branches and brush. No trail, no maps, no markers. My lungs burned, but I kept going until I burst into a different section of forest. One that actually looked like a forest again. Natural. Imperfect. Real. I collapsed against a tree, panting, shaking uncontrollably. I tried my GPS again. Still no signal. My compass needle trembled like it was nervous. I told myself that if I just kept moving uphill, I'd eventually find the ridge trail again. That altitude would help me gain direction. That logic could still save me. But logic had stopped applying the moment I followed that first marker. I walked for what felt like hours. I kept checking the time, but my watch froze at 2:17 p.m. I tapped the screen repeatedly. Nothing. It wasn't dead. It was just frozen. The forest kept getting darker, even though it wasn't late. The canopy thickened until I had to squint to see. My footsteps echoed in a way I've never heard in a forest. Each step sounded like it traveled farther than it should have, like the ground was hollow underneath. Then I reached the stream. A narrow ribbon of water, clear and quiet, cutting across the forest floor. Normally, finding water is comforting when you're lost. This one wasn't. The ground around it was too smooth, almost like polished stone. The water moved too slowly, as if reluctant to flow. And when I crouched to refill my bottle, I noticed my reflection in the surface looked delayed, like a fraction of a second behind my actual movement. I jerked back so fast I nearly fell. That's when I heard it, a sound. The first sound since I'd left the real trail. A soft tapping, like wood knocking gently against wood. Tap, 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 steady, rhythmic, purposeful. I froze completely. The tapping grew louder, closer, moving behind the trees like footsteps, but too even, too measured. Something was circling me, Not rushing, not hiding, just circling. As the tapping grew louder, I saw something on the ground. A new trail marker. Fresh. Orange. Pointing toward the tapping. I didn't follow it. I ran again, crashing through brush, slipping on wet moss, branches whipping my face. The tapping followed me, not fast but consistent, as if whatever made the sound didn't need to hurry, as if it knew I wouldn't get far. Eventually the tapping faded, but I didn't stop. Not until my legs gave out and I fell to my knees, gasping for air, vision spinning. My GPS flickered back on, but the coordinates it displayed weren't possible. I wasn't anywhere on the printed map. I wasn't anywhere near the hiking area. According to the device, I was several kilometers outside the forest boundaries, somewhere blank. No name, no contour lines, nothing, white space. My throat tightened again. I turned in a full circle, trying to steady my breathing. The forest around me felt wrong again. Too still, too symmetrical, too expectant. That's when I saw the figure. Not a person, not an animal. A silhouette standing between two trees far ahead. Tall, unmoving, its outline blurry, like heat distortion rising from a road. I blinked hard. It didn't disappear. It just stood there, facing me, still as a statue. I stepped back. It stepped forward. Not fast, one slow, deliberate movement. My entire body reacted before my mind did. I spun and sprinted uphill, lungs tearing at the air, vision blurring with each step. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed distance, needed elevation, needed out. But the forest changed again. The incline flattened, then reversed. The trees began to mirror each other perfectly, forming patterns that felt impossible in nature. I kept running anyway, refusing to look behind me. By the time the sky finally appeared again through the branches, slivers of pale light, I collapsed onto a patch of grass. Actual grass, real dirt, real leaves, real smell, the familiar forest. I was out, or so I thought, because when I turned around to look back, the trees behind me didn't match. The section I'd just come from was darker, deeper, like a shadow pretending to be a forest. And right at the edge, barely visible, stood the silhouette, watching. Then it stepped backward into the dark, and the forest swallowed it whole. My watch unfroze at that exact moment. 2:18 p.m. Only 1 minute had passed. I didn't believe it. I didn't want to. But the truth is, that wasn't even close to the end of what happened out there. And what I found next proved that someone, or something, had been creating that path long before I arrived. I wish I could tell you that once I escaped that shadowed part of the forest, everything went back to normal. That I simply walked back onto the marked trail, hiked out, and chalked it all up to exhaustion or misinterpretation. But that would be a lie. What happened after I left that strange boundary is the part that still keeps me awake at night, because it proved beyond any doubt that the forest hadn't let me go. It had simply shifted the rules. I got maybe 100 meters away before something felt off again. Not wrong, just misplaced. I kept walking, but every step felt like I was drifting in the wrong direction, like gravity was pulling me backward. I checked my compass again, and this time the needle didn't tremble. Instead, it pointed in a perfect line toward the dark section I had just escaped. No matter how I turned, the needle snapped back, insisting that north was inside that unnatural forest. My stomach twisted. Compasses don't lie like that. I shoved it in my pocket, telling myself to stay rational. I focused on something simple. Keep moving uphill. That was always a safe rule. Higher ground meant perspective, signal, distance, clarity. And for a few minutes, it actually worked. The trees around me were uneven again, naturally spaced. The air smelled right. The silence broke as a bird chirped somewhere above me. A tiny sound, but it nearly made me cry with relief. Something alive existed here. Then I saw the cabin. At first, I thought it was just an old hunter's shelter, weather-worn, slanted a little, wedged between two massive oaks. The roof sagged on one side, and the front steps were covered in moss. No smoke, No sign of anyone living there recently. But still, a structure in the forest where no maps showed anything? After what I'd just experienced, it felt wrong. Yet the exhaustion in my legs said otherwise. Shelter meant rest. Shelter meant orientation. Shelter meant a chance to gather myself before deciding what to do next. I hesitated at the door, listening for any movement inside. Nothing, not even a floorboard creak. I pushed the door open slowly. Inside, the smell hit me first. Dust, old wood, and something faintly metallic. The single room was empty except for a wooden table, a chair, and a few objects scattered on a shelf. But it wasn't the emptiness that froze me. It was what was carved into the table. Arrows. Hundreds of them. Tiny, shallow carvings, all pointing toward the center of the table as if converging on an invisible point. Each arrow looked almost identical to the bright orange markers I'd followed earlier. My chest tightened, and a cold wave rolled through my body. Whoever had carved these had done so with obsessive precision. And then I noticed the dust on the floor. Not normal dust. The same pale powder I'd seen in the strange section of the forest. A thin trail of it led to the table, then stopped abruptly, like something had been standing there, coated in it. I stepped back, nearly tripping as my heel caught on a loose board. The cabin groaned softly under my weight, and for a moment, the air seemed to thicken. That's when I found the notebook. It was tucked behind a broken plate on the shelf. Small, leather-bound, with pages yellowed by time. My hands shook as I opened it. Most of the writing inside was smudged beyond recognition, faded by moisture or age. But a few lines remained legible. Don't follow the arrows. They lead where paths shouldn't exist. Once you see the Watcher, it's already too late. Don't sleep. Don't ever sleep. The last page had only 2 words, written so hard the pen nearly tore through the paper. Still here. I slammed the notebook shut, heart pounding so violently I felt lightheaded. I needed to get out of the cabin. I needed distance from that place, from whatever the arrows were, from whatever the Watcher was. The walls suddenly felt too close, too tight, like the building itself was holding its breath. As I stepped outside, the forest welcomed me with a breeze. And something else. A new trail marker, fresh, bright orange, stuck into the ground not 10 steps from the cabin's door, pointing directly at me. My legs nearly buckled. There was no sound, no movement, but the message was unmistakable. It knew I was here. It had known the entire time. I didn't think, I just ran. I sprinted through trees, over roots, down embankments, pushing my lungs until my chest screamed. The forest blurred, the world narrowed to a tunnel of panic and instinct. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if something was following. My only goal was to put as much distance as possible between myself and any marker, any carved arrow, any hint of that pale dust. Eventually, my legs gave out again, and I collapsed by a fallen log. My breathing was ragged. My vision pulsed. I pressed my hands to the ground, grounding myself in the realness of dirt and leaves and flawed nature. But as the adrenaline faded, I realized something terrifying. The forest was different again. Subtle changes at first. The trees a little too symmetrical, the shadows slightly misplaced, the silence returning like a closing curtain. I hadn't escaped at all. I'd just run deeper. I tried my GPS again. Dead. Not frozen this time. Dead. The screen was black no matter how long I held the power button. My compass needle spun lazily again, like it had given up trying. I don't remember how long I sat there crying silently into my sleeves. Minutes? Hours? It didn't matter. Eventually, I forced myself to stand. I couldn't just sit and wait for whatever was in that forest to find me. I walked. Slowly. Carefully. Listening for the tapping. For the Watcher. The forest grew darker. Yet I could tell it wasn't evening. My internal sense of time felt distorted, stretched like fabric pulled too thin. Then, just when I thought I'd lose myself completely, I spotted something through the trees. Movement, but not the wrong kind. A familiar kind. Natural. People. 3 of them wearing bright colors. Hikers. My knees went weak with relief. I yelled out, stumbling toward them. They froze for a moment before one waved back. When I reached them, I must have looked feral, sweaty, scratched, shaking uncontrollably. They asked if I was injured. I told them I was lost. They asked how long I'd been out there. When I told them just a few hours, they exchanged looks. "You couldn't have been far," one of them said. "There aren't any unofficial trails here," another added. "That part of the forest was closed years ago," the third said softly. "No one goes past the ridge." I opened my mouth to argue, but then one of them pointed behind me. There was nothing there. No shadows, no tall, unnatural trees, no strange corridor, just a normal forest path, a mapped one. They led me back to the main trail, then down to the parking area. I felt like a ghost drifting through a world I wasn't sure belonged to me anymore. When I reached my car, the sun was still bright above the treetops. Normal, ordinary. But the moment I opened the door, something fell out of the side pocket. A trail marker, bright orange, freshly painted, pointing inward toward my seat. I dropped it like it was burning me. The hikers saw it too. One of them asked if I'd brought it as a souvenir. I told them no. They didn't ask again. I left the forest shaking, and even now, months later, I don't know if I truly made it out. Because sometimes when the room is quiet, I still hear that soft tapping. Sometimes my compass on my desk twitches without reason. And sometimes, most nights actually, I dream of the watcher standing between the trees, waiting patiently for me to follow one more arrow. And the worst part is, the marker that fell from my car wasn't the only one. A week later, I found another one leaning against my front door, and this one had something carved into it. 2 words, written with the same shaky hand I saw in the notebook. Still here. I didn't go back to the forest. I never will. But part of it followed me anyway. And I don't think it's done. Thank you for listening to my story. I appreciate you staying with me through everything I just shared. If you felt the tension, the fear, or the mystery, consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video with someone who loves stories like this. It helps more than you know, and it keeps these experiences alive for those who want to hear them. Thank you again for staying until the end. Stay safe, and stay aware of the paths you follow.